Hey guys, my name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be filming my June wrap-up. I cannot believe June is already over. Like, what even? This month went by so fast. In the month of June, I managed to read 13 books. I actually did quite a bit of reading this month. And on top of those 13 books, I also did want to mention that I got over 100 pages into You Deserve Each Other and If I Never Met You. I started reading these both during Romanceathon, and I just wasn't really feeling either of them. So these are not included in the 13 books that I read this month, but I did read part of these books as well. And then I also wanted to mention that I am 50% of the way through two other books as well. I'm over halfway through The Vanishing Half, but I didn't quite get a chance to finish it before this wrap up, but I'm really enjoying this one. This is the first book that I've read from this author, and I just really love her writing style. And then I'm also 50% of the way through Felix Ever After. I've been listening to the audiobook all morning, didn't get a chance to finish it before this wrap up. But let's talk about the books that I did finish this month. So as far as genres go, I read 4 nonfiction books this month, and then 2 thrillers, 5 romances, and 2 horrors. And then I had 5 5-star books this month, which, like, whoa. And I had 2 4 stars, 3 3 stars, and 1 1 star. Yep. Alright, so let's just jump into what I read this month. So the very first book I picked up this month was One to Watch, and this book was so freaking cute. This book is a romance, but I feel like it's more of a like dramatic, romantic, contemporary novel. Follows this girl named B, who is a plus-size fashion blogger, and she's obsessed with this show called Main Squeeze that's basically like The Bachelorette, like low-key. She writes a blog post after one of the finale episodes saying that she wished the show would be more inclusive on the different body sizes on the show because everybody on the show is skinny as fuck. And so then the show reaches out to her for the next season, and they want her to be the person on the Main Squeeze, like The Bachelorette basically. And I think because The Bachelor and The Bachelorette is such a guilty pleasure show of mine, I just really love the drama of a show like this, and I loved seeing her interactions with all the different guys. My only issues with this book, I guess, were the pacing, because the pacing of it felt really weird. I felt like she went from having like 20 guys to like down to her top 5 within like a few pages or something. I was like, wait, what? And I don't know. I know there's definitely one specific guy in this book that you kind of root for the entire book. I wish there were more books about this type of thing, like a dating contest show. Like, I feel like that's something that I love to read about that I didn't even know that I love to read about until I read this book, you know what I mean? But yeah, this was a 4 out of 5. This was super cute, and I loved, there was so much different representation in this book, not just like a plus size body, but like all different kinds of representation. And it was just, it was so cute. Highly recommend. And then the next 3 books that I picked up this month were all books that I read for that video that I did of tailored book recommendations, picking books for me to read. I did a video at the beginning of June called A Book Recommendation Service Picks My TBR, and I can link that up above if you missed it, but it was a very interesting experience to say the least because they recommended me these 3 books. The first one, Bent Heavens, was a 1-star book for me because this is a young adult horror sci-fi kind of novel, and it's about this girl. Her dad goes missing, and he had always believed in aliens, but she had never believed him. And then after her dad goes missing, she finds this alien-like creature in one of his traps, and then it's kind of about her feeling like maybe her dad wasn't so crazy after all. This book was, oh my god, it was so bad. I feel like it's one of those books where it's very obvious that a male writer is attempting to write a young female character, and it's just bad. And I feel like there wasn't enough sci-fi and horror in this book. Like, it claims to be those genres, but it honestly just feels like a young adult contemporary with a really bratty female lead where she's just like hanging out with her friends and just being obnoxious, and then the guy has to do all of the challenging things for her because she can't possibly do it herself because her nails, and like, oh my god, it was just a hot mess. It was terrible. I gave it 1 star. And then I read These Women by Ivy Buchado, which this one is an adult thriller, or so it claims. I would say this is more of like a slow burning mystery and literary fiction. This one follows a bunch of these different women who live in Los Angeles, and they all kind of work in the prostitution world, and I really do like the fact that this book shines a light on the prostitution world and how like those women aren't taken as seriously, and they don't receive help the way that other women do that don't work in this field. And when one of these women gets murdered, nobody seems to really care or do anything. And this book is kind of about this serial killer that's going through these women that are working in prostitution and killing them one by one, and we kind of follow from the point of view of all of these different women who are experiencing this. There were some things that I really liked about this book, like the fact that it takes place in Los Angeles. I like the fact that it is shining a light on this issue of women dying in the field of prostitution and nobody's taking it seriously. But also, this book just isn't a thriller. Like, it didn't feel like a thriller to me. Like, there was nothing about the writing that was very, like, intense. I don't know, like, it had a little bit of mystery to it, but I would not call this a thriller at all. So I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. And then I read The Hole for that video, which this is one that I've never even heard of before, but they recommended this to me because this one says a Korean take on Misery by Stephen King, and it is very similar to Misery in the sense that it follows this guy who gets into a car accident with his wife, and then his wife passes away in the accident, and he has to get taken care of by his mother-in-law, which was like his wife's mom. And the mother-in-law is like slowly kind of going insane, maybe. This book is very slow moving. It's considered a horror novel, and it definitely is, but it's like a slow burn literary horror novel type of book. But I really enjoyed it. I really loved the discussion in this book about loneliness and grief and how those can be the most horrifying things. And I feel like this is one of those horror novels that really plays on real life fears like loneliness and grief and depression. And I don't know, I thought it was pretty great. So I give it 4 out of 5 stars. It really surprised me. The next book I read was the first nonfiction book that I read for this month, and it was White Fragility. And I wanted to read this book because of the blackout buddy read that was going on, and I couldn't get my hands on a copy of White Rage, but my library had White Fragility available, so this is the one that I ended up reading. I'm really glad that I read this book. I know this book is kind of getting some like controversy right now because it's written by a white woman. And to be honest with you, before I read this book, I had never even heard of the phrase white fragility, and so I feel like so much of this book was a learning experience for me. I didn't end up reading this book because it's a nonfiction book and because I feel like I read this strictly for educational purposes and not like entertainment purposes, you know what I mean? So it just kind of feels weird and uncomfortable to rate this, but I am glad that I read it. The next book I read was also a nonfiction memoir, and I listened to the audiobook for this one as well, and it's All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This book is about this young black queer boy who's discovering his sexuality and his identity, and it's a story about him growing up. And this book is nonfiction, but it almost kind of reads like fiction because you're just reading about his life from his childhood to his teenagehood to his adulthood. And I really enjoyed this book because I feel like he really talks about things in great detail, and he doesn't shy away from talking about the mistakes that he's made in his life and things that he regrets. So it just feels very genuine and very real. I also really loved his like family dynamics in this book, like the stories about his grandma and the stories about growing up with all of his cousins in his cowboy boots. Yeah, I just think it's a really beautiful memoir, and I think if you're looking to get into more like own voices, stories, and memoirs, I think this is a great place to start. Like, this book was just so beautiful and it's so well written, and I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Alright, and then the next book I read this month was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, aka my most anticipated book of the year. Holy crap, I loved it so much, and it lived up to all of my expectations. And I actually did an entire reading vlog for this book, so I will link that up above if you missed it. Wow, this book was incredible. This book is a thriller slash horror novel because it definitely dips its toes into both genres. This is the 4th book from Riley Sager. I've read all 4 of his books and I've loved all 4 of his books, but this one might be my new favorite. This one or Lock Every Door, I don't really know. This one follows this girl Maggie who, her dad has recently passed away, so she's inherited the house that they grew up in. And her dad wrote this book about the house they grew up in called House of Horrors, and it's very like Haunting of Hill House vibes because he wrote this book about the house. And so in between the chapters of Maggie going back to the house that she just inherited from her dad, we get chapters of the actual book that her dad wrote that were talking about how the house is so haunted and stuff. So I love that we go back and forth between the 2 point of views of like Maggie in the present day and then her dad's chapters from when she was a kid. The book was so scary, it was so suspenseful, and there were some scenes in this book that genuinely scared the crap out of me. Like, they were so freaking creepy. Love, like, this is literally like the most Haunting of Hill House vibes thing that I've ever read. I loved it for that reason too, and I just loved the father-daughter story in this book happening as well. Yeah, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It was everything that I wanted it to be, and it was so good. Alright, and the next book that I listened to was also an audiobook. It was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. And this book was so gorgeously written, and it was so moving, and this is another nonfiction story that's mostly about race, but I think it's more of like a memoir style though, because he's writing about his own experiences and his concerns about being a father to his son. And the way that he writes about their bodies in this book, like, oh my god, it's just written so well and so beautifully. And I think that this book is a really great educational experience as well, because it does talk a lot about American history and all the things that they don't teach you in American history. Honestly, I feel like this is one of those books that should be required reading, because it's really short too. It's really easy to get through. The audiobook is only like 3 hours long. And it's just very, very powerful, and I highly recommend the audiobook because the author reads it himself, and hearing his words spoken the way that he intends them to be is just an amazing experience. One of the quotes that I just wanted to share with you that really stuck with me after reading this book is this one that he was saying to his son. He said, "You are growing into consciousness, and my wish for you is that you feel no need to constrict yourself to make other people comfortable." And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. This was a 5 out of 5 for me as well. And then the next book that I read this month was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I'm so glad that I finally gave this book another chance, because this is one that I had actually DNF'd in November last year. I had only gotten like 50 pages in, and I just wasn't in the mood for romance when I picked this up. But I decided to give this another shot because everyone lately has been saying that this romance is freaking amazing, and I'm so glad that I decided to pick it back up, because this was a 5 out of 5 romance for me. And this book follows this girl Chloe Brown, who's this black British girl, and she also has chronic illness which gives her chronic pain. And honestly, it was so refreshing to read about her character, because I don't think I've ever read about a character in a romance novel that suffers from chronic pain. And this book is just so cute because it follows Chloe Brown and her 2 other sisters. And y'all know that I love sister relationships in books, and I love the fact that this series follows each one of the sisters in a different book, so I'm very excited for that. This book is so adorable because at the beginning of this book she has like a near-death experience, and then she's like worried because like there was no life that flashed before her eyes right when she thought she was about to die. So she feels like she needs to make a list of all of these things that will help her get a life. I love books that kind of involve lists and things like to help you like grow as a person, you know? Like it's one of my favorite tropes. Her love interest in this book, Red, is the superintendent of the building that she's living in, and he is like simultaneously giving off bad boy vibes, but he's also like the softest human ever, and he's a painter. And when you learn more about his past, like he's just so freaking sweet. Their banter in this book was the cutest shit. Like they had the best chemistry I've ever freaking seen, and I just like adored everything about this book. So it was an easy 5 out of 5 for me. Like I love it. It's one of my favorite romances that I've read this year and that I've ever read. So next, immediately I picked up Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, because this one just came out at the end of June, so I was like, I need to get my hands on that now, and I'm so glad I did, because this was also a 5 out of 5 romance for me. And this one, I think I might have liked this one even more than Chloe Brown, which I didn't think would be possible, but this one follows this girl Danny Brown, who's Chloe Brown's sister, and Danny Brown is this fierce British black woman who has pink hair, and she's bisexual, which is just so cool, because I feel like it's really rare to find books where the main character is bisexual and they end up with someone of the opposite sex. And you know what's so cool about Danny's character is that she's an English professor at a college, which like, wow, freaking life goals. And then this is her romance with this guy named Zaf, who is this ex-rugby player, and now he's working as a security for the building that she works in. There's this video of them that goes viral when he's like carrying her out of an elevator shaft because she gets stuck in an elevator shaft, and he like helps her get out of there, and then he literally carries her like this like out of the elevator, and the video of them goes viral, and then people think that they're dating. And because he is like an ex-rugby player, he's kind of like a local celebrity in their area, so he has this charity that he really wants to be successful, so he asks her if they would want to fake date so that he can keep the buzz alive about them. And oh my gosh, dude, fake dating is one of my favorite tropes ever, so I was definitely here for that. And I just love Danny's character so much. Like I just relate to her so much because of her like fear of relationships and her fear of getting attached to someone. The way she talks about how she doesn't feel like she would make a good girlfriend and all these different things that she says in this book, like oh my god, she was just 100% so relatable for me. Like one of the most relatable characters I've ever read about. And Zaf is like the biggest freaking sweetheart. Like I just adored his character too, and these two have like the best chemistry. Honestly, I don't know which one of these is my favorite. Like they're both 5 out of 5, and I love them both for different reasons, but also similar reasons, because I do feel like Chloe and Danny have the same kind of like sarcastic attitude about things, which I love because they're sisters. But also like I feel like they are also very different, and their love interests are very different, but they're also both like very soft. So I don't know, but I loved everything about this series. I can't wait for the 3rd book coming out next year. year, and I just adore Talia Hibbert's writing. Like, it's so refreshing and just so different from other romance, I feel like. Alright, the next book I picked up this month was Inside Affair by Ella Frank. This was one that I was pretty excited to read because it's a new male-male romance from Ella Frank, and I've previously loved a male-male romance from her. And in this one, we follow these two guys. One of them is a gay news anchor that he works for the news, and like, that is so cool. And then the other guy is a detective, but he's going to be working as a bodyguard for the news anchor dude because the guy that works as a news anchor is openly gay to the public, and he's started to receive some questionable threats, and so they want him to hire a bodyguard so that he can be safe. And so he hires this guy who's kind of like his family friend, who's a detective, and then the detective suggests that they start fake dating so that whoever's sending him these threats doesn't know that he has an actual bodyguard. Like, they want to make it like low-key, you know? They start fake dating in this book, and oh my gosh, I just really loved the idea of this book. I loved it so much. I don't know why I've recently been obsessed with anything that follows like a news anchor in like a newsroom. Like, ever since watching The Morning Show last year, I've just been really interested to read anything that has to do with like taking place in a newsroom and like a news anchor type of job and stuff. Like, it's just so fascinating to me. So if you have any other book recommendations that have that kind of job, let me know. But yeah, unfortunately this book ended up being just okay for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars because I feel like, as much as I love a slow burn, like, you guys know how much I love a slow burn, I feel like this was such a slow burn that like it took so long for anything to happen because one of the guys was still convinced that he was straight for pretty much more than half of the books. But I do realize that this is the first book in a series, I guess, which I didn't realize until I finished it because it ends on a cliffhanger, and so that was a little bit like, ugh, annoying. So I don't know if I'm gonna continue in this series or not. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. And then the next book that I read, that was the last book that I read for Romanceathon, was The Boyfriend Project, and I'm really excited that I finally got around to this. I actually listened to the audiobook for this one as well. This book was good. It just wasn't great, and I definitely had some issues with it, but I still think that this book was pretty good. The things I really liked about this book is that it follows this girl who works in tech, and I love seeing girls working in jobs like this because I want to read more romances where like the girls have some bad bitch jobs, you know? Like, it's just so cool. And then I also loved reading about the sisterhood and the friendship between our female lead character and her friends that she makes in this book. I thought that they were just so cute and so empowering with each other and just like really cute to read about. But I think where this book kind of fell flat for me was the actual romance. But I just feel like, I don't know, like, I just feel like these two never really had any chemistry and nothing that I was like rooting for. I don't know. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It was okay. I'm still glad I read it though. And then the last book that I just finished this month was the audiobook for So You Want to Talk About Race. This is another nonfiction book that's specifically talking about race. I feel like this is another one of those books that should be required reading because I feel like I learned so much just from this book, and she just makes a lot of very valid points that just makes you think, and it's honestly just been making me think about things that I never considered before. And I feel like, whereas like White Fragility, I feel like White Fragility is more catered to white readers, but I feel like So You Want to Talk About Race is just catered towards everyone. I really like this quote from this book as well when she said, "Being privileged doesn't mean that you are always wrong and people without privilege are always right. It means that there is a good chance you are missing a few very important pieces of the puzzle." And this book specifically taught me so much about systemic racism, and it also talks about racism not just against Black people but also against Asian people as well. Just the whole conversation about like white privilege and like what that means is so important in this book. I'm just really glad that I took the time to read this book this month. And the audiobook is fantastic. I would highly recommend the audiobook, and I do think that this book is important for everyone to read because I feel like I learned so much from it, and I'm sure many other people could benefit from listening to this book. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of June. Please let me know your thoughts on any of these books that I mentioned, and let me know how many books did you read in the month of June? What was the best book that you read in the month of June? I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that my favorite books that I read this month was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager and these 2 books from Talia Hibbert. I just really enjoyed my experiences reading these books so much. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you guys next time with a new video. Bye!